Cremation, or the burning of a dead body to ashes. Is this something we as believers can partake in, or is it something we should rather shun? Historically, we understand that cremation is purely a heathen practice. Nowhere really in the Bible do we ever find examples of cremation. Very rarely. 98% of the time in the Bible when somebody died, they were either buried in a tomb or they were buried in the ground. So, what does the Bible say about cremation? It may actually surprise you to find there's two instances. The first is in 1 Samuel chapter 31 verse 13, and the other instance was in 2 Kings chapter 23 verse 16. And both of these were not really cremation by choice. As I said, 98% of instances in the Bible is where the dead were buried in a tomb. That's traditionally called sleeping with your fathers. So they would normally, like they did with Yeshua, put the body in a tomb, and after 1 year they'll come back when the body has basically returned to dust, as Yahuwah has created us from dust. To dust we return again, from the earth dust. From the earth he created Adam, from the dust of the earth. So when the body has returned to dust and the bones are left, the bones are normally collected, put into a smaller container, and then put back into the sepulchre or the burial tomb of the family. But the cremation examples in the Bible is basically when Saul died, Saul and Jonathan in the first book of Samuel, chapter 31, verse 13. Then the people of Jabesh Gilead heard that the Philistines had killed Saul, and some of the valiant men marched through the night to Beth Shan, and they took the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Beth Shan. And Beth Shan, interestingly enough, means the house of the sun. And they went back to Jabesh, where they burned the bodies. And of course, they took the bones after the body was burnt to ashes, from dust to dust, and they buried the bones under a tree in Jabesh. And they fasted for 7 days. There's not really any other example in all of Scripture where the biblical families, all from the time of Genesis all the way into the New Testament, where cremation was ever a chosen practice from any of the believers in Yahuwah or his son Yeshua. In the second book of Kings, chapter 23, verse 16, Josiah took the bones out of the tomb and he burnt them on the altar. And by that, he basically defiled the altar. So again, there's not much in the Bible as an example to cremate ourselves when we die or to cremate our loved ones when they die. Of course, we all do understand that cremation is basically a heathen practice. We see cremation all throughout history, basically in the Roman and the Greek ancient histories, even in today in many of the Eastern history in Hinduism. We see it with the Vikings, even in England. Even in the Christian history of England, they used to burn the bodies. But it's not something that is necessarily prescribed by Scripture, but neither is it prohibited by Scripture. So if we do go through all the laws of our God in the Bible, we never really see where it talks against the burning of a dead body. Of course, Yahuwah is against the burning of our children to the god Molech, but that is child sacrifice. Myself personally, I would choose not to be cremated. I would choose to be buried. That is our tradition at the moment. A lot of people has opted for cremation, and some people criticize them. If there was a law in the Bible against cremation, I would also criticize the practice. But we don't criticize that, although we don't follow that practice because we don't see examples in Scripture. So when the Bible is silent on a subject, we cannot really say much about it. If the Bible doesn't prohibit it, then we can't say it's wrong. But we can also not say that is the preferred method because why? The Bible examples are not for that. The only real examples that I do find of cremation all throughout scripture is, a lot of the Old Testament prophets will prophesy of the end days. And of course, in the book of Revelation, the culmination of all these end day prophecies are really summarized in the book of creation, where God basically, when he ends the time of earth and he defeats Satan after Satan has been released from his 1,000 years on earth, God has this thing that has been prophesied all throughout scripture, that when he comes down out of heaven with the new Jerusalem, he will consume the beast, the Antichrist, the false prophet, and all those who followed them by the breath from his mouth. And of course, after the 1,000 years, Satan is released, and Satan also will be burnt. For instance, in verse 9 of Revelation 20, it says, "A fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them." So God is definitely using cremation at the end of this age before he then makes a new heaven and a new earth. But yet again, this is all we can really say about cremation. The Bible is not very clear whether it's acceptable or rejectable by us. And therefore, we each can make our own choice as long as we always go back to Scripture to see what is the examples given to us there.